number of you asked questions that were related in some way to epistemic relativism. I want to go through a few of them. One of you asked, why would it be bad for intuition-driven romanticism if people had different intuitions about these cases? Well, maybe think about it this way. Intuition-driven romanticism thinks of intuitions about particular cases in epistemology as the data for forming theories. This is how scientists think of the results of experiments as the data for building scientific theories. And so if we imagine the science analogy, imagine somebody dropped a bowling ball in the United States, they dropped a bowling ball in East Asia, maybe in Beijing, and they dropped a bowling ball in, say, Delhi. And each place they dropped it, the ball dropped at a different speed. It took a different, it moved at a different speed or accelerated at a different rate. That would be very puzzling. And you would think, well, we have a couple options. One is to say gravity works at different rates in different places. So you can't have a universal theory of gravity. You'd have to say gravitational pull is different in different places. Or you could say there's something wrong with using this scientific experiments as data for our scientific theory. Something similar is true of intuition-driven romanticism. Either you have to say, look, if you get different answers about whether somebody knows in these cases, you have to say, look, knowledge is something different to East Asians and to South Asians and to Europeans. Or you could say, maybe it's the same thing for all, but we can't use our data. We can't use our intuitions about these cases because they differ so wildly. And so it would be bad, they think. They think, well, the idea that knowledge is different across different cultures is not an attractive idea, at least to Weinberg, Nichols, and Stitch. And so they say that means we shouldn't use intuitions as data in forming our epistemological theories. That is, we should not be intuition-driven romanticists. Somebody else asked, why do Weinberg, Nichols, and Stitch find it implausible that people in Europe would form beliefs in different ways or rely on different principles of reasoning than people in East Asia? Similarly, why do they find it implausible that people with high socioeconomic status would form different beliefs about justification in different ways than people with low socioeconomic status? And I think we need to be careful here because I don't think they do find it implausible that, say, Europeans might form beliefs in different ways from East Asians, or that high socioeconomic status people would follow different principles of forming beliefs than low socioeconomic people. They actually think that the kind of experimental data they find shows that something like this is the case. So they don't think it's implausible that people would form beliefs in these different ways. What they do think is implausible is that this should inform our normative theories of epistemology, that it should tell us how people should form beliefs, that it should tell us what the right principles of reasoning are. Because what this suggests is if people from Europe do form beliefs or do rely on different principles of reasoning from those in East Asia, and our intuitions about these cases show us how they should form beliefs or they should reason, that it follows that people in Asia, in East Asia, should reason differently than people in Europe. They should form beliefs differently. That is, what follows is an epistemic relativism. What's good belief formation, what's the right way to reason, is different in East Asia from Europe. Not just the way people actually do it or tend to do it, but what they should do is different. And the same between high and low SES cases. And this is what Weinberg, Nichols, and Stitch find implausible. It's the normative claims about how they should reason or how we should form beliefs. They don't think it's plausible that these vary across socioeconomic or cultural or racial divides. Final question here. Would the suggestion of epistemic relativism somehow play into the idea of changing contexts of knowledge that we looked at earlier and overcome some of the problems with that answer to the findings of Weinberg, Nichols, and Stitch? So the suggestion here is maybe Weinberg, Nichols, and Stitch findings are somehow related to epistemic contextualism that we talked about when discussing skepticism. And I think this is a really interesting connection that I hadn't thought of before. Maybe there's some connection here. But it's important to keep in mind that here context changed based on the sort of physical situation in which you were speaking, what other people and yourself were thinking about, what the purpose of your conversation was, what alternatives were made relevant. That's the kind of stuff we thought changed the context when we were talking before. For it to apply here, it would have to be that the context depend on things like the race or gender or socioeconomic status of the person forming beliefs. These are sort of more stable things than just what's been brought up in the conversation or what you care about right now. And I think, at least Weinberg, Nichols, and Stitch would think these things like race, gender, socioeconomic status, they shouldn't have any effect on whether we should be able to say somebody knows or not, even if things like what alternatives are made relevant or how high the stakes are should. But it's an interesting point, and I think one that deserves further thought.